Hi everyone, this is the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting of 29th November. Today we're focusing on kubeadm, the state of 4.1.9, and maybe looking a bit forwards on how we could implement self-hosting AJ and improved upgrades as well. So first up we have Fabrizio, but yeah, there he is. Fabrizio, are you on the call?
Hi, Lucas. Can you hear me?
Yes. Feel free to go on.
I'm the first in agenda.
Yes.
Okay, so quick update about the EP table experiment about using 10.96.0.01 as a load balancer. And first of all, I touched the document with all my notes. And second, I think that I managed a first working solution. It is not implemented in the code yet, but it is quite easy to reproduce if you want. There are all the structure in the document. And that's it. I think that I'm going to stop with this experiment because it is not targeted to go in production. But the result may become usable in future.
Thanks. Yeah. Identify a solution for. Okay, you had a doc for it. Cool. Yeah. So for reference, this was an initiative that we talked about as a possible way to address all the masters in a cluster from the node's point of view. Basically, using the kubeproxy for self-hosting the internal Kubernetes service. Like there's one Kubernetes service in the default namespace. With our default subnet, it has the VIP of 10.96.0.1, and we were thinking if kubeadm join could create the first IP tables rule for this VIP pointing to the Bootstrap master, then the kubeproxy would come up and update this VIP as new API service come aboard, as the new API service will automatically update this internal service in a controller loop that runs in it. So it seems like the experiment was successful, and we now have more data on that it works and how it works, but we don't know if we really want to do this. Probably we'll use something like Envoy, which has real load balancing capabilities instead of using an IP tables rule, which basically where the load balancing is random instead of using cached. Respecting caches for the API server. Sergey, were you about to say something? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, about your comment about the Envoy. I mean, are you referring, when you're talking about the load balancer, are you referring to the like a Kubernetes load balancer type of service, or load balancer in the sense of HA proxy type?
HA proxy type. So basically something that would run on a node and proxy the communication for the kubelet, for example. So when the kubelet should talk to the API service, well, the kubelet can only, the problem is the kubelet can only talk to one address, And since we have multiple API servers, we have to have some place where we like split this one point of contact to multiple points of contact to the different API servers. And that could be Envoy or something. Or it could be a VIP.
Yeah, I was looking in the contrib directory for the Kubernetes, and there was an interesting contribution for keep alive D VIP, and I think it pretty much does what you're describing, and it's already there. Some people have tested it, so maybe it's worth to look into it as well.
So I know that Martin, you're on the call, right? So he basically wrote a kind of like straw man guide for setting up HA for kubeadm, or at least like integration between kubeadm and like a HA environment, and he used Nginx and keep alive D as well. So yeah, that is an option too. It's just, I don't know. I mean, again, it comes back to like the nature of kubeadm, right? Should it sort of favor one approach of doing things, or should it facilitate people to go out and do it by themselves, right? I mean, I think there's like there's a boundary there that we need to make sure that we don't cross.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be all docs in the first variant that we're doing for 1.9. It has been possible to run AJ clusters with kubeadm from basically from the get-go. If you can set up an LTD cluster externally, and if you can create this load balancer like in your cloud or something, whatever, using DNS, and then copying the certificates from master 1 to master 2 to 3.
Yeah.
So they are shared.
So in the pull request that I submitted, I started out with cloud load balancers pretty much because it's just the easiest thing to do, and it's not unreasonable to expect that people are deploying Kubernetes to a cloud environment. But I think it's super important, as Martin highlighted, that we also cover the use case of like on-prem and bare metal environments where people are not going to have a service to rely on. So I think I'm going to go back to that doc I wrote and just try to make it, try to make it as modular as possible, so that when we do have like those switch boxes that we can have on the website, we can like easily plug out, oh, this is like your load balancing setup step right here. You can either use a cloud load balancer, or you can use keep alive D, or you can use I don't know, Envoy kind of thing, and we can plug out different bash scripts depending on the choice that the user wants to make. And then from the following steps onwards, it doesn't really matter how they did that previous step. Like from that point onwards, it's the same experience, right?
Yeah. Let me see. There we go. Does anyone else have something more to comment on the way we could load balance traffic from the node to the API service?
This is Craig. I'll just echo what other people have said. We're doing the same sorts of things at Heptio, but instead of using keep alive D, we're using ucarp. Same idea though, in Nginx.
Are those scripts OSS or? Craig, are those scripts or resources you have internal at Heptio, are those open source or like in Heptio experiments or something, or are they closed source?
Right now they are closed, but my effort this week has been to open them up. So they will be getting open shortly, and they will be under the Heptio Labs GitHub repository organization.
And do you have docs for that too, or is it like very minimal, bare bones kind of thing? I'm just trying to think about like how do we hand off, right, to Heptio?
Right, it's pretty minimal right now because this has like literally been a week or two in the making. So I would still also consider it very alpha, but it is a collection of Ansible playbooks that can basically take kubeadm as the underlying install mechanism and quote unquote HA it.
Cool. That sounds good to me. Then we have Jamie next up.
Yep. So it kind of ties into the HA doc as well. A few comments asked about the form factor of etcd in a HA environment. I was of the opinion, like I have no strong opinion about this. My opinion was that having sort of dedicated nodes would be preferred because then you have kind of like hardware isolation, and if a master goes down, it doesn't like screw up your database kind of thing. So that was my initial assumption, to have separate, like 3 VMs for your etcd layer and then 3 for your masters. But I think Martin and Lucas both said that, we could co-locate that on the masters themselves, right? So yeah, I just wanted to sort of gather feedback and try and figure out if anybody has, got experience doing this, whether they've have any observations about best practice and stuff like that.
All of our best practice at Heptio would be to run them as isolated nodes, but we certainly have customers that do a little bit of both.
And do you have any strong reasons for having dedicated, like isolated nodes, apart from just increased fault tolerance? Do you also see like performance better, or is it just like disaster recovery kind of thing?
Well, there are. I can try to. I'm mobile right now, so I can't link it right now. But there are best practices from CoreOS around running Kubernetes on isolated nodes. Running etcd on isolated nodes. So our feelings in particular around this are basically around the lifecycle of Kubernetes. I'm saying Kubernetes instead of etcd. Lifecycle of etcd, and it has particular constraints around how you want to roll an upgrade, for instance. How you want to manage the general lifecycle of etcd, and that's still one area that we're not really clear on what how we're going to do this with kubeadm, I guess. I know that Jamie, you've been working on this, and I meant to touch base with you earlier this week, but I would love to touch base with you on your thoughts and findings around the etcd operator and such.
Okay, sure. So based on what Craig said, Lucas, do you still think it's better to co-locate? Because I know apart from that, you also said that we should maybe try and host etcd use in static pods and have like the kubelet handle the lifecycle instead of systemd. Is that like a good idea, or do you think it's just more convenient to the user to do that, or?
I'm interested in other people's opinions.
Well, I think that if we decide to host etcd outside Docker, i.e. running on systemd, then I think people can do it either way, have it on the master nodes or in external nodes. Then it's just a matter of taste, and there's only one thing we have to document, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, we had a quick discussion within our community, and some providers, some current cloud providers, they would prefer to have a etcd still hosted within a Docker environment and not installing anything on the actual host. So their rule of thumb is OS plus Docker. That's it. Nothing else goes in the native mode on the host. So if there is any way to kind of push the etcd as a containerized solution, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely becoming increasingly popular to do that. My question is, when you say it's favored by providers or service or cloud providers, is this like mass market solutions, or is this specific to HA? I mean, do you see many HA environments that do Dockerize the etcd?
Well, I cannot say many, but several of them, they prefer to go with the etcd as Dockerized, and one of the reason is much better management, especially in the multi-node environment. So, I can definitely bring one of the providers who is using that solution to directly express the advantages. But I had just a quick chat with him, and he mentioned that definitely in their environment where they have a multi-host configuration, they prefer to go with the Docker.
Okay, so it's worth pointing out that well, hopefully in 110, kubeadm 110, we should have Dockerized etcd via the operator. So that should be provided out of the box by kubeadm. But until that point, it's just the question is like, how do we want to document this so people can set up themselves, right? So I think it's easier to do systemd. If there's an easy way for people to Dockerize etcd too, we can document that as well. But I think just to go back to what Martin was saying, if we did go with systemd as like the sort of base form factor, then it doesn't really matter how you host etcd. You could Dockerize it, have it in a container, right? I mean, it's just that the life cycle of that container is managed by the OS rather than just some kind of user.
Yeah. So as Clayton now also was saying, like the reason why I proposed to run things inside of the kubelet static pods is like in your PR. It's just because we could. Well, we don't assume systemd. Then again, and like, well, most of the systems do have systemd these days. But again, there's always this question like, well, what should we if we don't have this? Also, I found that like upgrades with kubeadm right now are really easy, as we can just shift around these plain text files on disk. We can just bump the version, and the kubelet will do all the stuff for us. We don't have to execute a lot of like first edit the drop-in file somewhere in a specific location, then like systemctl daemon reload, systemctl restart kubelet, restart etcd service and things like that, and handle rollback and these things. I mean, I think it gets a lot of easier for us. And Sergey was also pointing out that, well, we get it Dockerized, then we don't pollute the host in the same way. Like between, like, well, we have etcd 3.1.10, now we want to upgrade to etcd 3.2.11 or whatever. That's just a matter of config file rewrite. So yeah, I think, I mean, and again, to be clear about this effort, I mean, there have been talk about upstreaming Kelsey's Kubernetes the hard way guide. This effort is basically our first baby step towards that effort. Making something the Kubernetes developers could recommend. I mean, there will be a lot of diversity here in any case, but at least something for the user that is new to Kubernetes, knows about sysadmin like stuff for sure, but is interested in like how does Kubernetes devs do AJ in a common way, or a somewhat like validated, vetted way that people actually use. So it's more of this recommending some good solutions for users that we have tried. We maybe even have E2E tested. This is not the case for 1.9 that we'll do, but maybe at some point in the future or whatever. But yeah, it's more about, I mean, this has been possible, but for a long time. But still, I get pinged a lot of days in the week on Slack by people like asking, when is kubeadm AJ done? And and it's like, well, you could do it, but you then have to do these three things again. So it's more like to reduce that load.
Right. Yeah, I completely understand. So, yeah. Do you think it's worth then like having separate tabs, one for static pods, one for systemd, just to provide that option?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because also like I mean, so CoreOS, I know at least I think so. I think Ryan's on the call. Maybe he can confirm this. But for their Tectonic products, they've just moved to hosting etcd in systemd rather than the operator and Dockerize. So I think there is like a lot of a lot of interest in hosting it on OS. But if we do the same thing where we can balance people's use cases and offer both as documentation, that would be cool.
I'm not exactly sure if we've fully migrated to that, but it sounds like a reasonable goal to get to.
So just to be clear on the point that I made earlier about running in separate nodes, I wasn't intending to say run it in systemd. I think we would prefer to run it in Docker under management of Kubernetes. But the tricky part here with kubeadm is that it's being managed through static pods. And when you get into the lifecycle of etcd, like, even joining nodes to the etcd cluster or making etcd itself HA inside of Kubernetes under kubeadm, it gets kind of tricky. So I don't know if we have a good solution for that aspect of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. So tomorrow I can have a look at that. I mean, if we're just hosting them in static pods, I don't think much will change in the HA guide. I think we would still either manually generate the certificates and then try and figure out how member joining works. One question I had for Lucas, do you think we could do a lot of this setup with the phases thing? So I know that we have a phase for etcd setup, right? Does that generate certificates or?
No. So what we have is like we have a function that kubeadm init uses that basically create a local etcd static pod listening on localhost and nothing more. Like, I mean, it's it's insecure in the way that anyone on the master node can access etcd directly, right? But I mean, that is something we're going to improve as we go. But as we've talked about in earlier meetings, in other times, like the master is the boundary right now. If you tolerate normal workloads to run on the master, you violate this like the security layers anyway. But I mean, in a really production thing, you probably want your etcd nodes and like dedicated etcd peers on dedicated nodes, then the masters with the control plane, and then the nodes. And these should never like touch each other to have the different boundaries cleared. But we have to balance between usability and like security, and we've made this compromise for now. So no, kubeadm doesn't include anything to generate certificates or similar. But I think static pod hosting shouldn't change anything from kubeadm's point of view. I mean, you have to use, from kubeadm's point of view, you have to use external etcd, right? Point to the node where etcd can be reached.
So so if we did host, say, if we had 3 masters and we hosted etcd in static pods, the way that the master configuration files would look like, I assume they would reference the external IP for the master node, right? They wouldn't refer to like local hosts. Yeah, so to all intents and purposes, it's still external etcd. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it shouldn't be much different then.
The etcd phase also does not support anything like clustering of etcd. So like you can't point at the initial cluster of nodes and their addresses.
Yeah, and that's kind of by design right now, because we've tried to stay out of etcd clustering, like not build in this vast amount of logic. Well, yet, I guess.
I get it. I'm just pointing out a fact there. But
yeah,
if we want to, if we want to do this, like, there's all kinds of orchestration that has to happen against the static pod manifest that is not like, we don't have those capabilities right now. I have a crazy idea that maybe there's a way that we can have like an operator that manages static pod manifests. But I don't know if that holds any water yet.
Yeah, so a month ago or something, we were actively discussing what we should do with etcd. Like so we want to do this kubeadm init, then kubeadm join -- master or something like that flow. So we could add a new master dynamically with the minimum amount of effort. And then we have to cluster etcd in some way. And we were thinking, should we build something in kubeadm, something like kubeadm specific, that clusters etcd, where we have to manage and own the lifecycle of etcd? Or should we try to use the etcd operator to reuse the logic there already, like code that is already written and run by many users already but that is mostly for applications, of course. And we decided we'd at least try out to reuse the etcd operator for that purpose. I don't think that excludes per se an experiment like Fabrizio now has conducted on the kubeproxy self-hosting that would tinker around with some etcd static pod orchestration thing. I know Justin Santa Barbara is really passionate about this topic as well, and is, from what I know, looking into something like etcd admin, or I don't know what he calls it, but anyway, something that would cluster etcd in a more user-friendly way than the primitives that etcd give us, like out of the box.
If I can give my opinion here, is that basically my feeling is that we are moving away from static pods, and also with the self-hosting thing. So it's not a long-term decision to propose or to manage an etc cluster in static pods. So I prefer the solution based on the etcd operator. And for the scope of the guide that Jamie is writing, I think that it is perfectly fine to propose the solution with a systemd managed etcd. We can also propose the solution based on etcd on Docker, but it is not mandatory to have etcd on static pod. I think there is a difference there. I would suggest etcd on pods only when we are able to use the operator.
And what's the reason? I mean, what's forcing to have basically Dockerized etcd and use the operator at the same time? Why just the static pod is not good, or not? What's the reason?
Well, the operator today does not work against static pods.
I mean, so we've tested that the etcd operator can fulfill kubeadm's use case of clustering etcd and offering it in a HA capacity. I'm not sure that the fact that it can't do that in a static pod way takes away from that ability to solve our use case. From the way I look at static pods right now is that it's a short-term solution until we have the operator, right? It's a short-term stopgap until we can host the cluster data store in Kubernetes, right, and use the Kubernetes lifecycle tools to manage etcd. You know, after 1.10, whether we still want to advocate static pods as a form factor, that's a discussion we can have later on. But I think until that we do have the operator, personally, I don't see that much of a problem with static pods, because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, it's a means to host etcd and Docker just like you would in a systemd unit file, right? I don't really see that much difference.
Yeah, I think both have their own use cases and scopes. So I think using static pods is a good solution as well for the use case of not self-hosting things or not using systemd. It's a good middle ground. Documenting both for now is just fine. Any more opinions or something? Comments? Okay, let's proceed then. Yeah, so a 1.9 update. A general docs update might be needed, like just going through the general getting started guide, checking if there's anything we need to refine there, something small that has changed. Might not be the case, but generally there are 2-3 things that we change for each release there. I hope Fabrizio's man page and reference guide will be merged soon. Jamie just sent upgrade PR. I'll look in a minute after this is done. Yeah, please look at the release cycle doc that I wrote up in order to see, like, right now we're at stabilization. What should we do now? We have CI jobs, which should be green. We should check that they are green. Release notes are coming up soon. Getting bug fixes in is a priority. We have to send one PR that is basically bumping the default version kubeadm deploys for to 1.9. So kubeadm 1.9 doesn't by default set up a 1.8 cluster. Then we have I made a tracking issue for kubeadm in the core repo, so that the release team can use that as a channel to communicate with the kubeadm team. And yeah, then we now have the also the RPM job should be created soonish. Jamie, do you know if you have time to?
Yeah, so I think we just need a new pull request to test infra, right? So I should have time for that tomorrow.
Cool.
So out of interest, is test infra also affected by code freeze, or is that like a separate thing?
That is a separate thing, as it most often the normal case is that people code a lot during like the 2 months. Then the 3rd month there's a lot of, especially yeah, a lot of action there. Starting adding tests and coverage ED for new features and enabling things. So yeah, I mean that is not affected to code freeze. Job be created. RPM pushing validation. Cool. And I got the release managers. Thanks to Jamie's deb script, I got the release managers to push all the debs, which is cool. So now we have everything in place. It should turn green on the next run. And I mean, RPMs should be exactly the same, because when a release branch lead pushes the debs, he will remember to push the RPMs as well. But it's just to double check for posterity. The test grid tab. I recently sent a bug fix PR for kubeadm, touching some of the downgrade upgrade code. A couple of bugs I found there that could be fixed now. So that is in progress. That will fix one failure at least on the test grid. But yeah, I mean, we have there. The periodic kubeadm job is totally green. The kubeadm GC 1.8 on 1.9. So deploying a 1.8 cluster with kubeadm 1.9, that job doesn't look green. So action required. There. Is there any other? The upgrade job seems to be a little bit broken as well. It might be a test infra issue, or it might be a kubeadm issue. Action required. There as well. But things seem to be fine at head, though, so should be pretty okay. And yeah, Sergey had a PR, which I'll review right after this, for not trying to downgrade a TD, because that won't work, as discussed yesterday.
So I also today went through the spreadsheet for outstanding doc requests for our SIG, and unless I'm mistaken, I couldn't really find any outstanding ones. So I think from Doc's perspective, do we need to do anything else for 1.9, or are we good?
I will update the spreadsheet with that information. Link to your upgrade doc PR that you sent now, just to have at least something for them to see. I mean, there's not much lines that have to change, but a couple. And yeah, maybe somebody going through the general getting started guide, looking that it's up to date, just like sanity checking. That is the only thing I can think of outstanding for docs, because your and Fabrizio's PR are the two main ones.
Yeah, actually, so when Fabrizio first submitted his pull request, I remember going through like the entire thing, which incorporates pretty much all of our docs and just correcting stuff anyway. So hopefully we don't even need to do that again, because it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So should all be up to date.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, we don't have Xiang here today, nor Wojtek, so we might table the the discussion. No Clayton anymore. So do you want to discuss this right now, or should we like invite people to a special meeting discussing this, like how we could make a general like how we could inject failures to etcd, an AJ etcd installation more easily in E2E tests, so we could catch Kubernetes gRPC, for example, Kubernetes client issues. For example, we had this AJ failure where the etcd client built into Kubernetes had a bug, and gRPC had a bug, and then then those combined with etcd server bug made things pretty unstable in some environments when running an AJ cluster, which have led to some regressions from well-known companies. So yeah, I mean, most of these things will be fixed in 1.10, maybe already in 1.9. But as a post-mortem here, we want to increase the coverage here because we realize we have some kind of E2E tests on GCE, or GKE, but we don't know really what they're doing or how they're setting things up or whatever, and if they're maintained at all. I don't know. So this would be something that we would do with that CD operator, right? And using that, we could, in a Kubernetes primitive way, Kubernetes native way, inject failures.
Yeah, but I think a separate meeting would be great for that.
Yeah, we'll do so. Anything else you wanted to discuss? Is everything with the AJ otherwise, like the AJ documentation, on track?
Yeah, I think so. I think Tim just left some comments, so I want to have another look at it tomorrow and maybe add some more tabs based on our discussion today. So yeah, I think it's pretty much on track. Do you know when the doc freeze is? Is it next week sometime? It's the 1st, I think, right? I think it's like the first few days of December. So
docs freeze is, so docs deadline, all docs PRs must be ready for review is 1st of December, which is in 2 days, on Friday. But docs complete is 8th of December.
Okay, yeah, so I think we've got enough time.
Yeah, so then all docs must be merged, but we have a week or so, so that's great. Martin, do you have any blockers? Or whatever?
No blockers from my side at the moment. I'm quite busy with some project work at the moment, so before next week I won't be able to do anything on this. Actually, it's good you asked me, because for me interesting would be to know how I can contribute best, because now I've just written up my guide and written a couple of Ansible scripts, and so if there are things that you would like me to do, or you would like me to do in a different way, just tell me. I shall try. Next week I will be more involved back in this now.
Yeah, so I guess this sort of ties into like a meta issue of like what technology should we include in our official documentation, right? I mean, should we include, if we're going to put it in a tab, should we include Ansible? And then like, where does that leave people who use Puppet? Where does it leave people who use like Terraform? So like, we get into that like really muddy area. I'm a big fan of providing a solution to users who can just copy and paste. But at the same time, we also need to respect like the agnostic nature of Kubernetes and kubeadm, right? So yeah, I don't have a great answer right now. I think I think you've already had a look at the pull request, right, Martin?
Yes, I have.
So it's, I'm just trying to think whether there's a way for us to. So I know that you want to address like an alternative load balancing solution, right?
Actually, well, I mean, I am quite comfortable with keep-alive-d and Nginx. I think I will pursue that. As far as Ansible is concerned, I don't think that we should push any tool forward. We should document what people need to do. And having some implementation of this is just an add-on.
Okay.
So since I'm doing this anyway, I'm happy to publish it, and so we can link to it. But anyway, it will be basically my project for my stuff that I will need for my code, basically.
Yep, sounds great. So, okay, so maybe we could have like you know, like a non-Ansible code snippet. If that's not possible, then we can just link off to like your GitHub repository or maybe even like a blog post or something like that.
Well, I mean, I haven't really included any Ansible snippets, only some templates from Ansible, because they basically just show what people have to fill in. And always underneath the Ansible template, there's always one example of an already filled in file. So that I think should be enough. You need some kind of placeholder, so why not use Ansible syntax? I don't see any harm in that.
Okay. Yeah. So okay, yeah. So we can sync on Slack or something like that, and then we can try and get something in before next week.
Yeah, that's fine for me.
Okay, then yeah, and we'll definitely talk about how people could contribute in various ways. Maybe, I mean, you could, if there's someone here also besides Martin that would be eager to step up and help contributing more in valuable ways, you can just ping me on Slack or whatever, and I'll reference some good things to take on. I have a pile, I guess. Yeah, we'll not meet next week because, well, myself and Robert and the other leads are giving an in-person talk about how you can contribute to Cluster Lifecycle and related areas at KubeCon. So basically at this time, I think. So yeah, but the week after that, probably. And yeah, we have 9 minutes left to the hour, which leaves us with 9 minutes more to improve Kubernetes, right? Bye, everyone. Thanks for a good meeting.